Hello and welcome to the Women Deliver 2016 conference in Copenhagen. I'm Ridi Tlabi. We are here to explore solutions to some of the most urgent issues faced by girls and women globally. In the studio, I have with me Helen Clark, three-time Prime Minister of New Zealand, leader of the United Nations Development Programme and possible successor to Ban Ki-moon, Secretary General of the United Nations. Welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now, you are in the running for one of the biggest jobs globally. What would you like to accomplish in the arena of women's rights?
Well, firstly, I think I could be a very, very visible champion of gender equality, of women's empowerment, which I have been all my life. I've broken a lot of glass ceilings to get to top positions. This is another one that I see as incredibly important for championing what needs to happen with and for women. I'd also hope to be part of appointing a lot more women to senior positions at the UN. When I look around the top tables, we're rather thin in number, and that has to change.
That is so true. And you're talking about the visibility of women. I come from a country where the authorities cannot be faulted for giving women positions or creating positions for women, but that hasn't translated in meaningful change in terms of our access to job opportunities, being safe from sexual violence. How do we then give meaning to the numbers?
Well, firstly, the policies have got to be right, and policies need to be driven by governments. They need to be in laws. They need to be in practical delivery. But then you have to work from the bottom up too, empowering women and girls to be agents of change themselves. They're not victims. They are people who can make the most positive contribution to society. But most societies don't see the full potential of women because of various forms of discrimination, barriers, stigma, whatever. So we have to have the bottom-up movement of women as agents for change, complemented by governments doing the right thing.
Does that glass ceiling still exist? I mean, you talked about the many challenges that you faced as a woman Prime Minister. Can you tell us about some of those? And when you look back, 2016, has there been progress?
Well, by the time I got to be Prime Minister, I think I'd kicked the barriers away, but I remember the early steps in a political career where you would put your hand up, as I did, to stand for a very safe constituency for my party, and people said, oh, she won't go down there, this is a working man's seat. I said, hang on, there are women in most of these households, and of course that was all nonsense and it was able to be kicked aside. But when I came up to top positions of leadership, like leading my party, which was the position of leader of the opposition, which was a route towards being Prime Minister, then everybody came out of the woodwork. They didn't like the way you looked, they didn't like the way you spoke, they didn't like the way you dressed. I mean, the whole list. And you had to kind of marginalise all of that and say, no, focus on what I'm saying. I've got a message. I'm a woman with a mission. I've got the ability to do the job. So now I'm coming forward for the Secretary General job saying, I'm the best person for the job. I've got the skills to do this. I've got so many years in leadership, both in my own country and region and also at the UN itself.
Let's talk about climate change for a moment, because I know that that is a subject that's very close to your heart. You've previously said that it affects women and children the most. What did you mean by that?
So I think there's 2 points to highlight. Firstly, in the event of the big climate disasters, the women are the most exposed to that. Women, children, and older members of the community and people with disabilities. They can't get out of the way fast. You think of a major climate event coming. A woman's trying to cope with all these responsibilities, all these care responsibilities. Often you just can't get out of the way of a major disaster. Then you find a major disaster, weather or other related, people end up in shelters. Those shelters can be extremely dangerous places where women and girls are more vulnerable to abuse and to violence. So women have to be part of designing the responses to natural disasters, the early warning systems, making women safe, and women being part of the recovery. Then come to climate change specifically. Women, the woman farmer, more likely to be on the more marginal and vulnerable land. Climate conditions change, her land is likely to be more affected by that, so her income suffers. There are so many ways in which gender plays a factor in how we are equipped to respond to natural disasters. So women have to be part of the answer. I came here to Copenhagen in 2009 for the big climate change conference, which didn't end so successfully, but one of the messages messages I've always brought is women have to be totally engaged in this climate change process, empowered to be part of it. Here at the big conferences of parties which bring governments and civil society together, let's put women's needs front and centre of this.
So I imagine that because there are unique challenges that are faced by women in the manner in which you have just described, that in conversations and the process to find solutions, women bring something unique. I mean, as a woman leader, do you feel that you brought certain attributes that a male leader would not bring precisely because of those unique experiences?
Well, I do, because I think in general, women are much more attuned to the needs of people. Women carry a disproportionate unpaid care burden. They're more attuned to what are the needs of the children in education, what are the needs in the health system. Women, unlike men, access the health system when they're healthy because when they're having their babies and have sexual and reproductive health needs associated with pregnancy and childbirth. We're very acquainted with it. We're more likely to be taking the children to the health service, the oldest member of the family to the health service. So we're much more plugged into what it is that really matters on the ground with the services that people need. And I think I bring that perspective.
It's quite jarring for me that in 2016 we're still talking about this. Just a couple of days ago, there was a very heartbreaking and disturbing report about UN peacekeepers themselves being perpetrators of sexual violence when communities look upon them to protect the women and children. What do we do about that?
Well, it's absolutely disgraceful that any person wearing the blue helmet of the UN peacekeepers is in any way associated with sexual and gender-based violence, because people look to peacekeepers to do good for the world, not to do evil. And it's important to take a very, very firm line on this. Such people accused of such offences must go home and they must be investigated and, as appropriate, prosecuted by their national authorities. And if that doesn't happen, then the UN is going to have to say no to troops from such a country, because you cannot have impunity for sexual and gender-based violence.
And lastly, Helen, we've identified the barriers to economic opportunities. What tools do we have at our disposal to fix that? Education comes to mind, but what else do we need to do?
Well, education's first, quickly followed by women and girls having all the access they need to sexual and reproductive health services and rights. If you can't control your fertility, then there's a lot of things you can't control about your life. But with that strong base of education and the sexual and reproductive health rights, women can go on to be empowered economically. Now, they need equal access to land, to credit, to all the things that make it possible to thrive economically. And we do need women in decision making. We need to hold those women accountable too for not forgetting about women when they get there. Don't pull the ladder up after you. That's a very important message to every woman in a decision making position.
Well, Helen Clark, I hope the next time I speak to you, you'll be the Secretary General of the United Nations.
I hope
Good
so.
luck with that mammoth task. Thank you. And thank you for joining us for this Women Deliver conversation. You can tweet your comments and questions about this and our other shows using the hashtag WDLive. And don't forget, our Twitter handle is @WomenDeliver. Thank you for watching. Goodbye.